Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for December 21st, 2025, and I'm Jaded Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been a long 3 years, but we have once again been transported back to Pandora to hang out with the Sully clan. Our family and friends are back once again under the direction of Goat Cameron. He is back, and he's about to be another $2 billion richer.
I can't help but laugh at that statement, JD, when you say it has been a long 3 years, when the last time it has been a long 13 years.
I know. Yeah.
Between movies.
I should be more grateful that it's only been 3 years this time instead of 13.
Yeah.
And I am. Don't get me wrong. But, and maybe this is a great transition into a little bit of pretext for our conversation here on Avatar Fire and Ash. Recently, Brennan asked me about my favorite James Cameron film, or what I think is the best. I can't remember exactly how you phrased it. And look, I think Aliens is a masterpiece. I think it's every bit of as good as Ridley Scott's Alien. And that will probably always be his best movie as far as I am concerned. But I say this, and I know right now we're fresh off the press with Avatar Fire and Ash, and it's real easy to get swept up in the spectacle and everything that it has to offer. And understandably, people are in their emotions about it. Totally get it.
Yeah.
But I do think that when the Fire and Ash begins to die down a little bit, if you will.
Nice symbolic analogy there.
I think at the end of the day, Avatar, The Way of Water, will be looked upon as one of his very best movies, if not his best movie. And I am very close. I'm getting dangerously close to saying that is his best movie to date. I understand Titanic is this gigantic achievement in its own right as well. I do love Titanic. I think it's great. Love the spectacle. It still holds up gloriously. That is a great movie. Aliens, as I noted, is a masterpiece. But none of those movies reach the emotional heights of The Way of Water. You couple that with the technological achievement of that film as well, the storytelling achievement, the fact that he got, I don't know if I want to say Oscar worthy, but he got some of the very best performances of that year, as far as I'm concerned anyway, out of actors that we never in a million years saw that coming. And I'm, of course, specifically talking about Sam Worthington.
He got Sam Worthington to say what is essentially a very throwaway, uninspired line like, well, let's get it done, and made it sting with such emotion.
It is incredible. It is so good.
It's almost as if now that James Cameron has patented the phrase, well, let's get it done.
Yeah.
It's
Or
that
I
good
think
of a delivery.
I think of the moment soon after, and again, I not to review The Way of Water, but when we're talking about Sam Worthington's performance, and just to hammer the point home, when he says to his son there in that climactic moment, I see you now, just phenomenal. Like the way he delivers that line, it is a gut punch, and it is so remarkable. And again, people are talking about the performances of this movie. Maybe they're the best of the franchise so far. Again, like I have to pump the brakes a little bit. There's a lot to like about Fire and Ash, and we'll get into it here in a moment. But I don't think, spoiler alert, as much as I love Sam Worthington as this character, and I do think he's very good in Fire and Ash, it's not a better performance than The Way of Water.
It
it's
is
just
not. I don't know if I would place The Way of Water that high on my James Cameron ranking like you do. It's funny you say that, how much you love The Way of Water. I don't even think that made your top 10 of 2022, but I'm guessing that might change your list a little bit given how you feel about the movie now. It might shift things a little bit, but I do think at the very least it is one of James Cameron's better movies, The Way of Water specifically. And I don't know if it's one of the greatest sequels ever made. I would not go that far with that, but I do think it's maybe one of the greatest sequel improvements that I think I've ever seen, as far as the disparity in quality between the original film and how great its second film is.
Yeah. I have it at number 2 on my Cameron ranking.
I
Again,
have it.
I still maintain Aliens is his best film, and I just don't know if he'll ever do anything to outbid that for me. We'll see.
I think Aliens is one of the greatest movies of the 1980s. That's my number 1 as well. So we shared the same brain once again, at least with regard to our number 1 James Cameron film is concerned. I have Titanic at number 2. Admittedly, I do have a bit of a soft spot for True Lies. That might be my number 3. I love the sense of humor of that movie, and it actually feels like a movie as opposed to James Cameron making a James Cameron experience, which I kind of appreciate about the small potatoes of that movie comparatively. But The Way of Water could be my number 4, which is weird to say that I like it more than any Terminator movie. But I think I
do
agree
too.
with you. Yeah.
And I love the Terminator movies. Again, I'm not here to disparage his other movies. There's a reason I call him Goat Cameron. I love all of his movies. There's not a single one on there that I dislike. The first Avatar I'm mixed on, but I'd say overall the spectacle of it is enough, especially given how much I've responded to The Way of Water and Fire and Ash.
It kind of makes you appreciate that one more because of what it sets up. Yeah.
Exactly. I can very much appreciate that in retrospect. So there's not a bad movie on his list. In fact, most of them are very good. They range somewhere between good to very good to great to excellent. I'm quite high on a lot of them. So I'm not here to disparage the Terminator movies or True Lies or The Abyss or anything to that effect. They're all very good. When I say I think The Way of Water is one of the best movies he's done, it's just to emphasize how good I think that movie is.
The familial dynamics of that movie are kind of astounding.
I think I
did not expect
impeccable. That. And again, the technology he brings to that film, the effects of it, which are obviously really, really great, especially given the context of where we were in 2022. I think Simon Franklin's score in that film is arguably the best score. And I understand Titanic and the fans of that film are going to scream their head off at me, but I do think there's an argument. I'm not saying that it is, but I think there's an argument to be made that that's the best score.
It's the most consistent score that helps kind of like really, enhance the emotional trajectory of that movie and also the excitement of that movie.
Yeah.
I will say I think James Horner's work on that first Avatar maybe gives us the best theme of the Avatar movies.
And that's perfectly fair. And that's the one thing I will say about Franklin is that it's obvious that main theme is not his theme, but I think he utilizes it very well in the same regard that we would talk about John Williams and his Star Wars scores.
Yeah.
I think he utilizes that main theme very well. And the new themes that he brings to The Way of Water are so incredible.
And it takes a great composer to be able to create new themes that stand out while also being very tasteful with the iconic main theme of your franchise.
If his name was John Williams or Hans Zimmer, I think people would be losing their goddamn minds over the score to that film. I honestly think they would. I think the only reason it's not hailed similarly is because no one knows who Simon Franklin is. He's just not a household name.
I remember when my buddy Evan and I went to go and see The Way of Water when it came out in 2022. We were supposed to go see it in IMAX 3D, and the IMAX projector broke. So we were forced to see it in real 3D instead, which is not the ideal situation for that movie. Yeah. In a way, I guess it allowed me to feel less distracted by the visual effects that kind of guide these movies in a way. About halfway through The Way of Water, I was sitting there thinking like, wait, oh my God, am I actually this invested in the movie itself? I was kind of astounded by how much it was working for me. And by the time it ended, I was kind of blown away by how much better it was than its predecessor. It almost felt as though this was the movie James Cameron always wanted to make. He just needed 3 hours of table setting back in 2009 to get there.
Yeah,
That's kind of what it feels like.
Exactly. And I think the way he crystallizes that family drama, the emotion of it all, the loss at the end, the score of it all, the effects of it all, The Way of Water, and again, I get it. We're fresh on Fire and Ash. Whatever the next one is, when that comes around, it's going to be the same cycle. People will lose their goddamn shit over that as well. Then that'll be the new best Avatar movie. I get it. That's just how this works. So I understand. I understand. But when the dust settles and the ash dissipates a little bit, I think cogency will win the day. And again, I'm not here to disparage Fire and Ash. We'll talk about it. There's a lot to love, but I do think at this point, it's by far the best of the Avatar movies. And it's one of Cameron's best as well. I think the storytelling is so sharp. Again, the emotion is very much felt. The effects are great. It's such a well-rounded spectacle and cinematic experience that is, again, there's no loose threads to it at all.
I agree.
It kind of tells its own story in a great way.
I agree. Yeah, which is interesting setup for Fire and Ash, considering how these two movies were conceived, how they were originally intended as a single movie that then got split into two, which we see a lot. We see that happen a lot with big movies these days, is that the scope of them is so big that they're forced to release as two movies. But apparently this this duality between Fire and Ash and The Way of Water was originally written as a single story. And we'll talk about why that kind of makes sense, given where Fire and Ash begins and where it ends. But it's kind of interesting to say that when we look back at The Way of Water and think this actually feels like a complete movie on its own. Like it really does. It's interesting that that was the initial conception of these movies, when the first part, if you will, feels like its own separate entity with its own thematic idea front and center. It's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, with that laid out, let's get into Avatar, Fire and Ash. Thrusted onto the world of Pandora once again. It is directed by Goat Cameron, as I like to call him.
Big Jim.
James Cameron. Big Jim. Whatever you want to say. It stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, Sigourney Weaver, Stephen Lang, Kate Winslet, Una Chaplin, the granddaughter of maybe the greatest filmmaker of all time, one Charlie Chaplin. Who else? Joel David Moore, Cliff Curtis. The list goes on and on and on. Giovanni.
Did you say
Ribisi.
Stephen Lang?
Yes, I did.
Okay, just making sure.
David Thewlis has a small little appearance in the role.
That was random. I forgot he was in this movie, but I could pinpoint his voice right away.
Oh, right away. Yeah, immediately.
I was like, well, there's Professor Lupin.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. The synopsis says this, because we're all familiar with this movie. Jake and Natiri's family grapples with grief after Nityam's death, encountering a new aggressive Na'vi tribe, the Ash People, who are led by the fiery Varang, as the conflict on Pandora escalates and a new moral focus emerges. All right, Brendan, what did you think about Avatar, Fire and Ash?
I'm curious to see where this conversation goes. Maybe some of my thoughts might shift during this conversation. I think I'm kind of mixed on this one. I think my initial gut reaction tells me it's my least favorite Avatar movie, even though I think it has a lot of higher highs when compared to that first film in particular, which might give it the edge as we get to the end of this conversation, because a lot of what it's doing that works really well does work in conjunction with The Way of Water. It is kind of interesting that apparently this was conceived as a single story alongside The Way of Water, and you could sort of sense that. I have seen some criticisms that this movie feels like a rehash of The Way of Water, and I don't really buy that criticism. If anything, it kind of feels like an extension of it, kind of more like an epilogue of that story, I guess, which I don't necessarily mind that, but I do think it sometimes dampens some of the trajectories that were set up from that previous movie, especially given that this is yet another 3+ hour movie. I don't know if it goes much further with some of those ideas that were very intriguing about The Way of Water, but some of these highs, especially with regard to these familial dynamics that work so well in The Way of Water, are still really good here. There's a lot with regard to Stephen Lang's Colonel Quaritch that we'll also talk about that I do think is quite great. I just feel like the way this movie moves, it feels more relegated to plot than it does the vibe of Pandora, which is something I really appreciated about The Way of Water. There were extensions of The Way of Water where I felt like characters were just swimming with whales for what felt like an hour, and that was it. And I kind of love that. But there's a lot more plot. There's a lot more that's, physically told and what's happening with regard to Fire and Ash. And I do think that sometimes stifles the trajectory of where these movies are going. At least it kind of did for me. I also think this is a movie that maybe assumes that we feel like Spider is a more interesting character than he actually is. I'll talk more about that later, but I don't know if that was the right call, at least for me. So I don't want to say I was disappointed in this one because it doesn't ruin my affection for that previous movie, The Way of Water specifically. But I did not like this nearly as much as that one. I do think if anything, it kind of feels more like a minor continuation of where that movie was going. But I do think there are individual moments with regard to the familial dynamics, with regard to Colonel Quaritch, that I do think are very interesting. We'll talk about those further. But for the first time, I don't know if it was enough to justify a 3+ hour movie. At least with The Way of Water, I felt like, okay, this is long. It's kind of meandering, but I feel like it's all of a piece for a particular reason. I didn't really feel that here. This did not feel like it justified the amount of time it took to tell this story, which I guess is my fancy way of saying I think it's too long. This is the first time I felt that length when compared to the other two. So yeah, I liked a lot about it. I liked individual moments in it. I just didn't really love it as a full movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess as I get into my opening thoughts, before we delve further into it in a more analytical way, as we tend to do, I do want to have a little bit of fun here with my opening thoughts, because I want to imagine what that meeting was like between James Cameron and the producers of this film when they were reading that script for the first time.
Yeah.
Because one has to think that in the years shooting this film, getting it ready, there was so much emphasis on the technology that goes behind this film, making it as immersive as it is, expanding the world building as we see here. That clearly was the number one priority for James Cameron. And that does come through very well in this film. It is an incredible spectacle. No one is going to deny James Cameron that. But I imagine that he was so enveloped in that process that maybe days before they were getting ready to shoot, the producers asked him what the script was like. And he was like, oh, crap. Give me 10 minutes. And locks himself away in a closet somewhere, comes out with notes or a script. It was like, here you go. And the producers are reading the script going, okay, Jake and Loak, their relationship is disturbed.
Yeah.
Kiri has a spiritual crisis. The Tolkien are back and they're having some sort of big ceremony. Later on in the film, we find out the RDA are hunting them for some sort of special goo in their brain.
Yeah.
One of them, Payakan, is an outcast and he develops a relationship with Loak. And reading that, Quaritch is chasing Jake constantly throughout this film, but also he has this special interest in Spider. And at one point they have a conversation in some sort of science facility. Oh, and then we get to the end of the film and there's a big rally to get the troops ready for some big battle. There's a Tolkien gathering and there's a bunch of boats. And in the middle of the action, the girls are captured and they find themselves on a boat and the guys have to save them. And then the movie ends with Jake and Quaritch in a big battle. Oh, and a pivotal character dies. And they're like, this is the same movie, James. And he just turns around and goes, yeah, but it's bigger. It's so much bigger. And they're like, okay, go for it. Now,
Somehow
obviously,
you
I'm
know
having,
how to give us $2 billion anyway, so we trust you.
yeah. Now, obviously, I'm having a little bit of fun here.
I'm with you though. I would love to be a fly in the wall as how that pitch went.
And I get it. A lot of people are probably tuning me out here or rolling their eyes or, getting angry with me and sending me tweets and hate mail. I certainly get it. But I will say this. I find the irony astounding. It is deeply hysterical to me that this is not getting the Force Awakens treatment. The hypocrisy is so hilarious. Deeply hilarious to me.
That's because Star Wars has its own cultural world
Yeah.
that I guess Avatar doesn't exist in. It's not part of that kind of conversation. So
Yeah.
there you go.
I will use this as an opportunity to selfishly plug, though, a piece that I wrote at InSessionFilm.com this last week where I defended The Force Awakens, as I've done here on the show many, many times before, but this time in written form, that I think there is so much more beyond the superficial plot that, yes, it might echo a little bit of that first Star Wars movie. But when you look beyond those superficialities, there is so much more to The Force Awakens that conveniently gets overlooked when talking about that film. And I just think that
I
is
agree.
so funny how that is not happening here, that people are willing to overlook the similarities, the plot similarities, because this is the exact same movie, verbatim, purposefully so, the exact same movie as The Way of Water. And people are willing to overlook that for the depths of this film.
Here it's interesting that you bring that up, and I argue that I don't know if I would call it a rehash, but more of an extension. Yet at the same time, the narrative beats are very similar, but they do have very different emotional kind of feelings, if that makes sense. And I feel like these critics are defending Fire and Ash because it has a very different emotional energy to it, which is
Imagine
what
that.
Force Awakens was.
Exactly. A different,
that-
like
that's it.
any phrasing, every argument I've heard for this film, it applies to The Force Awakens. Objectively speaking,
I do
it is
wanna-
unbelievable to me.
I do want to ask some of these individuals, and not to say I want to challenge them to say that they're wrong. I really want to see what their thinking is. But if you're willing to defend Fire and Ash, but you're also willing to discredit The Force Awakens, I want to know why.
Yeah,
I really want to know why.
And exactly. And again, I'm not saying that you have to like The Force Awakens because you like this film or that you can't criticize the movie. I'm certainly not saying that. There's a lot of subjectivity to all of this.
But if your reasons are around those narrative beats specifically, then I really want to know why.
I just want to know what those details are because, yes, The Force Awakens follows a certain familiar formula, but that film very, very objectively is subverting those things and going underneath the surface level to tap into a different emotion that we had never seen before in Star Wars to that point. Now, whether that works for you or not is, again, we can debate that. We can talk about those nuances and whether they work or not. I very much think they do. And again, I think Fire and Ash is also doing something similar. I don't think it's a complete rehash. I do think it is more of a compliment. There is a lot. I just find the overall discourse on this deeply hilarious given that fact. And maybe it just speaks to how much you can't trust public discourse. And maybe that's an obvious statement.
Well, it's also
We know
the
that to be
cultural
true.
representation of these movies sometimes also plays a part into that discourse because it's more easily explainable and more easily, I guess, like reachable. And that sadly plays a part in it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Like every argument I've heard about this film very much applies to The Force Awakens. That's all I'm saying. But this film, from a narrative perspective, it is beat for beat the exact same. With where we find these characters at the beginning of this film, having to prepare for something. In this case, it's there's this new clan that is, as we come to find out later, it's the Ash clan that is causing a bunch of chaos. But in the way of water, they had to leave their homeland and they had to find the water tribes. But that establishes a different rapport, different dynamic. And then you go from there. And as I noted, Jake and Loak have this strained relationship. Kiri's on her spiritual crisis. The Tolkun are involved. They're hunting. The RDA is hunting the Tolkun. They're having to prepare for battle and all of this. Spider and his relationship with Quaritch, that is very much, there's a lot of parallels to that here. You get to the big battle at the end, and the girls, I find it very funny that the girls are captured again, brought on a boat again.
And,
they had to save them from the boat again.
And a sinking ship once again. So all of a sudden, the final battle in Fire and Ash is referencing every James Cameron movie ever made. Once again, there's a truth serum scene in this movie, which is a complete rip from True Lies. So
it's just so funny. Like, it is beat for beat the same. Now, does the film go beyond those superficialities to do something interesting? I do think it's trying to, Now, whether it succeeds or not, I do think that is a bit of a debate. And maybe I'm a little bit higher on this film than you. I did enjoy it overall, but I don't think it reaches the heights of The Way of Water. And I think because it falls victim to its redundancies, this is a bit of a bridge movie. To me, this felt more like we need to get to the fourth movie. So
which is
let's
wild
just
because
focus
James
on
Cameron
spectacle.
Yes. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's like, it's wild to think that because James Cameron has constantly said that this is meant to feel like a trilogy closer.
And I did not feel that at all.
It does not. Not at all.
Not at all. Like, this felt very much like a bridge movie. We're going to introduce new characters. We're going to introduce new stakes. We're going to expand the world a little bit. We're going to bring back characters from the first Avatar that we haven't seen since then.
Oh, yeah.
You know, with Ribisi's character and some of those that, because eventually this film does go back to the forest world again. So some of the human characters and the avatars that have been a part of that landscape, we see them again. It's been a while since we've seen them. So we are introducing characters we haven't seen before. We're introducing new characters. We're expanding the scope of everything here. We're introduced to an air tribe as well as the Ash clan. So there's a lot here in terms of expansion, in terms of building stakes. But where this film ends, it's mostly, let's get to the next movie. Let's get to, like, again, because like Varang, for example, who everyone's losing their minds over Varang. And look, she's a great character. I love the introduction of the character. I think Una Chaplin is fantastic in the role. I completely agree.
She is terrific.
She is terrific. She does disappear throughout a lot of the final act. And there's no closure to that character in any way, shape, or form. In fact, there's a lot about her we just don't know. The only time there's any sort of context as to the motivations of that character or the emotional depths of that character come in the little dialogue she gives us through that interaction with Quaritch when he's under the spell of the drugs.
Which is a great scene. That is probably one of the best scenes in the movie.
I wholeheartedly agree. So we learn a little bit about her there, and maybe you can infer certain things just because of her actions throughout the film, the curiosity with the weapons and the power, like she's hungry for power and wanting control. And that dynamic with Quaritch is great. But for me, a lot of that is just superficial thrill. In terms of depth, I think that lacks a lot, that leaves a lot to be desired, because I think we're going to get so much more in the next movie.
Yeah, I think Varang, as much as I think Una Chaplin is quite terrific in this movie, I don't think the writing is doing the work to make her interesting. It's purely Una Chaplin's performance.
It's her performance.
I love the idea that the Ash people here kind of represent another side of the Na'vi, because the Na'vi that we've been exposed to for 2 movies up until this point have been very, for lack of a better term, they're very religious, I guess is the best way to put it. Their connection to Awa, right? So now we have Ash people here that kind of feel like the atheists of the Na'vi. And I kind of like that idea, but the writing is not making Varang an interesting character. If anything, she's kind of underwritten in this movie. If it weren't for Una Chaplin's performance, she would be a nothing character in many ways.
I agree. Yeah, if she wasn't so mesmerizing, if she didn't have such a striking chemistry with Stephen Lang as Quaritch, then I do think people would be criticizing that character much more. It very
I
much
agree.
is the superficial, evocative thrill we get of the character on screen and the persona of the character. And again, full credit to Chaplin because she taps into it wonderfully. But I do agree with you. There really isn't much to that character, and that polarity you're talking about in terms of atheism versus religion. Great duality on paper, but that's not really explored here.
I agree.
I think we're going to get much more of that in the next movie, though.
Probably.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where all of this is headed.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with the Quaritch character and Spider.
Yeah.
The continuation of that is fascinating. I love the parallel, as much as I joke about the science bin parallels, where it's the exact same scene from Way of Water to what we see here. Same structure, same setup. They might have filmed them back to back, honestly, Lord of the Rings style, for all we know. Same exact thing. The little tidbits we get there as far as Quaritch and how he's so drawn to Spider, I do find fascinating. Does this film crystallize any of that? Not really. It feels like a bridge to the next movie. We get a little bit here. We get little sprinkles, little breadcrumbs to set up things that are never crystallized in this film, but they're leading to something more grand on the other side. And that to me is just the big difference between Fire and Ash and The Way of Water. The Way of Water was so contained,
Yeah.
It felt so well-rounded, kind of crystallized its own little thing. And I know you said earlier that this was supposed to be a combined experience. That's probably why James Cameron, all joking aside, said same structure, same plot, everything. There's just going to be a bunch of parallels. That is parallel the movie.
Yeah.
It should have just been called Avatar: The Parallels.
It should have been called Avatar: The Way of Water Part 2.
Yeah, and
Way
maybe
of Water again.
And I don't know, maybe you give us the same events but from a different perspective. Maybe that's the route you go. I don't know. But to essentially regurgitate the exact same plot, I don't know how compelled I was by that. I admittedly did find that frustrating, but I did love the spectacle. I do think some of the parallels are here. And maybe what I find most interesting about this film, especially if we're comparing the two, if The Way of Water is the New Testament that invokes ideas on love and hope and loss and sacrifice,
Yeah.
Fire and Ash is the Old Testament.
Okay.
This is about
true.
violence. It's about vengeance. It's about brutality. It's about testing faith. The best scene of this film for me is when Jake Sully goes full Genesis 22. He goes full blown Abraham. And for those that are not familiar with Genesis 22, this is a pretty infamous story in the Bible where God tells Abraham, kill your son.
Yeah.
I want you to sacrifice your son. Instead of an animal, I want it to be your son. And he cries and pleads with God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But he takes his son, he lays him on the altar and is about to sacrifice him. And right before the knife comes down, God goes, okay.
You
I
made your
believe
point.
you.
Yeah.
I believe you.
Yeah.
I tested your faith. You believe in me. You trust me. That's the end of it. We see that play out verbatim in this film.
And
Verbatim. It's
that's-
incredible.
And that's why I think there is validity in calling this a very different emotional side to The Way of Water. Same coin, if that makes sense. Like this is kind of a yin and yang kind of situation. And I think that proves your point, just what you're talking about there, how this is very Old Testament, whereas Way of Water was very New Testament. And I do think that scene between Spider and Jake Sully really works, but a lot of it works primarily because of how good Sam Worthington is as this character now. We get a lot of Spider in Fire and Ash to the point that it almost feels like he becomes the main character for quite a while.
Yep.
Much of the conflict revolves around Spider's relationship with Pandora and how his biology has changed because of all of this.
Yep.
I don't know if Jack Champion is that good of an actor to carry this type of movie just yet.
Yeah.
And I think that really is my biggest problem here, unfortunately. I thought he was quite fine in The Way of Water, but that's because he was used very sparingly. I think James Cameron used him very smartly in that movie. But here, he kind of has to carry the movie. And I don't know if he's fully up to the challenge. And I know he's only 21 years old. He's a young actor. There's a lot that he still has to grow into. And I'm not trying to be critical of a young actor here. But this is a very big, complex kind of filmmaking experience. And I don't know if he quite has the experience to fully carry everything that this movie is asking him to do. So when a scene like that works, it's because Sam Worthington has lived within this world and has lived with this character for such a long period of time. He kind of gets it, right? And I think he sells that scene very well, specifically.
Yeah. I also think it works in this context because I don't agree with you. Jack Champion is clearly the weak link here performatively. And I'm not always drawn into that character as a result. However, I think he's charming enough and I love his dynamic with the other actors that I'm willing to overlook it and buy into the character at large despite the performance. Because I do think everything else around him is really good, and not just the performances and the rest of the cast, but James Cameron as a storyteller and as a world builder. I love Kiri and her spiritual crisis, and we can talk about that as well, because this film, that's the one of the few elements here that felt like an actual continuation instead of some sort of rehash.
That felt new. You're right.
That felt really great. And she's such a big part of Spider's arc as well in this evolving dynamic he has in terms of his biology with Pandora that we see, which then leads to further actions and consequences as it relates to Jake and Quaritch respectively. And so much of this film is also about destruction and purification, the Ash tribe wanting to have some sort of power over Pandora. They're creating war against these other clans. And so this film, in a lot of ways, is about violence and vengeance. And that's one angle of it. The other angle here is Jake Sully himself. At the beginning of this film, we see that both of them are still grieving the loss of their son. That opening scene, by the way, stung me. That's the most The Way of Water this film gets.
I actually thought that was a really clever way of telling this story from the get-go, because I thought it was a simple flashback, and then we find out it's not, and that was actually kind of a pretty devastating stinger.
It was great.
I have to give Cameron a lot of credit there.
I agree. I love that moment. And what we see with Neytiri is that she is so full of hatred and bitterness and heartache, and she wears that on her sleeve. And it affects others around her. They visibly see it. Jake, as this father figure, this former military person, he channels all of that Neil Armstrong style into his work, into preparing for battle, into gathering ammunitions. And so in The Way of Water, where it was more about family and hope and trying to remove himself from violence, this is a film where he is actively participating in violence and knowing that the only way for them to get out of this alive is to fight back, to just fully give himself over to the brutality of what's at play. So when we get to that moment with Spider, and there's so much throughout this film where Cameron does a great job of tethering all these things together, where Spider is a part of their family, but not technically. Neytiri is grieving. She doesn't want a replacement for her son. And in a cold, distant way, very different than Neytiri, Jake sees why Spider is important to this family, especially for his kids, and is therefore a little bit more empathetic with Spider. And also understands that Quaritch is after him as well. And that plays a role as far as Jake's perspective goes. But that moment is about testing faith and boundaries and realizes that the only way to get Neytiri to understand empathy is to go full Old Testament. We're going Genesis 22, baby. We're going to bring Abraham into this. and again, it is a bleak story. Like Genesis 22 is a heart-wrenching story.
Sure.
And I just love that this film is willing to go there. And I do think it makes sense in this context, given what Cameron is wanting to explore here. So it's not just Jake as a character. I do think thematically speaking and what Cameron is wanting to explore here in terms of the deeper moralities at play, how there's this cultural war at play with all of these clans, that to bring Genesis 22 into the fold here, it made so much sense thematically and tonally. And I think the film really earns that moment in a great way. And for me, it was maybe as much as I love the spectacle, and the spectacle is great here, despite the redundancies. I love the visuals of it all. That final battle, that final fight between Jake and Quaritch is great. But there's something about the human element or the Na'vi element at play there in that moment and what it means for those characters, that on the emotional side. And it's the one moment of this film where I was fully invested in this film emotionally. Again, not necessarily from the Spider side of things, but everything else I just laid out.
From the Jake Sully side of things, I would say.
I was pretty gripped by that moment.
Well, I think a lot of what leads to that moment that makes it so effective, and some of the moments of the film that I found most effective, it's actually the dynamic between Jake Sully and Neytiri, Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana, respectively. Because for much of the movie, I feel like each of them kind of represents the extreme dichotomy of the New Testament versus the Old Testament, and how there are different belief systems that stem from each of them, and they both kind of represent that. For much of the movie, they're not really on good terms, Jake and Neytiri specifically. It got to a point where I thought, wow, is James Cameron making his version of a breakup movie in the Avatar universe? It was getting to that point. And some of their early sequences in the first act where they're just very openly and almost verbally, violently disagreeing with each other. I found those to be some of the most effective sequences of the movie, especially when Neytiri very vocally says how much she hates humans, and she starts calling attention to their pink hands and things like that.
Yeah,
which, of
that
course,
scene when Jake fully calls her out on it, and we're like, "What about your own kids?" Like that, her reaction there is quite invigorating.
And I'm sitting here thinking like, well, this is how racism starts. So there's another conversation there to be had. But I feel like the whole idea that you're bringing up about the New Testament versus the Old Testament, the dichotomy between Jake and Neytiri and their disagreements kind of represent that. And I think that's what makes that moment between Jake and Spider that is so effective.
Yeah.
It makes it so well earned because of everything that leads to it. And the arc of Jake in that moment, what he has to come to terms to.
Well, and I think that's why he has to go to those extremes, because that relationship was so strained.
Yeah.
And she, throughout the whole film, had been so cold and distant, not just with Spider, but to your point, all of them, including her own kids to some degree. But obviously, she still loves her kids. She makes that known multiple times throughout this film, especially toward the end. But because of that distancing that we see with Neytiri here, and Jake is so he has created an ethos that's all about unity, and that's how we survive. That the only way to bring her back in, when he goes to the forest, we as the audience know that this is not about Spider, and it's certainly not about Jake and the sacrifices that he's claiming that this has to happen. We all know this is for Neytiri, and he has to go to these extreme lengths to make that known. And so when she comes in, that's when she's able to kind of put those pieces together. And I just love that this film is willing to be so Old Testament.
Yeah.
This film has way more in common with old school biblical epics than it does any of the previous Avatar movies.
That's fair. Yeah.
And that's where I find it maybe the most fascinating. Because I certainly was distracted. I was slightly disengaged with it in terms of its redundancies. There's still so much for me to love with this film as a spectacle, though. Like, I do love the visuals and the world building, and again,
I mean, sure, yeah.
the dynamic we see with Quaritch and Varang, as we noted earlier, like all of that stuff on the
Oh yeah,
surface. There's so much
the
fun to be
like,
had.
the sexiness of their relationship is
Yes,
kind of
people
kind of a
talking
thing
about
of
that
beauty,
too.
Yeah, it's
Like,
very
yeah.
horny. It's
It's
very horny.
horny. Yes, sounds like a great weekend. Like, yeah, no, and again, I can have fun with all of that. I do. This is a really fun movie. In a lot of ways, I think this is going to end up being one of the more rewatchable Avatar movies because it's very engaging in terms of those superficialities.
Yeah.
I just don't think it makes for the best Avatar movie.
No,
Like,
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
The Way of Water is admittedly a tougher watch. It's emotionally way more stinging, and there's more depth to it, and it takes its time. Like, that's not an action-packed movie. This is an action-packed movie. Again, that's why I feel like this is a bridge. It's more concerned with building spectacle, with building stakes, with just making everything bigger, introducing characters without concluding anything. Like, you can have fun with that. And I did have fun with that. And I think there's a rewatchability factor as a result. The Way of Water, it asks you to participate with it in a deeper way.
It does.
And that to me, and I do. Like, I admire that. That's why I've watched that film like a dozen times, despite
It's
it being
great.
over 3
it really
hours.
is good. Yeah, it's a great movie.
So good. So yeah, I mean, like Avatar: Fire and Ash will be an easy watch. And,
It will
and it's
be.
meant
And-
to be consumable in that way.
And it will be made even easier if you have The Way of Water as a loving tie to your like your experience with these movies, because a lot of what this movie is doing as far as trying to find this sort of gray area between humanity and a cultural like Navi like world that is so different, and how some of these individuals get lost within a different culture in that way. The Way of Water was very good at finding that bridge by representing the Sully family as both native but also human, right? Just like the simple idea that the kids that both Jake and Nateri have, they feel very tribal, but then they're also not above like giving people the middle finger. So like there's a jokiness to it that feels very human, but also not at all. And you still get a lot of that here in Fire and Ash, but a lot of that was set up for us and explored much further and more, I think, effectively in The Way of Water, which does make this more of a bridge movie. And that's why I'm struggling with whether this is my least favorite Avatar movie or not. Like I said in my opening thoughts, I think there are moments in Fire and Ash that are among the highest of highs from these three movies. And I think it is a more complex movie when compared to that first one at the very least. But I also think that first movie is a much tighter experience. And that's why I'm kind of struggling with that. Of course, it's not like The Way of Water. I think that's going to be the best Avatar movie, regardless of whether 4 and 5 ever get made. I think that's kind of at this point set in stone, at least for me, and it sounds like it is for you. But I do think that first Avatar, while overly simple as it is, at least feels like a much more tightly knitted experience, narratively speaking.
Yeah, I think
than
that's
this one
fair.
does. Yeah.
No, I think that's fair. I do prefer this to the first Avatar just because, again, all those superficialities. We're about to release a review of Marty Supreme very soon. It's already recorded. And in that conversation, we have a guest who talks about the filmmaking. Like, say what you will about the film's themes, all of its nuances. And look, we get into all of that as well. But there's a great point in the conversation where our guest simply says, yeah, but the filmmaking is great. It's just so thrilling. I could just sit here and watch this film from moment to moment because the filmmaking is that good. That's how I feel about Fire and Ash.
That's fair.
Do have my issues with this film, except it's a little bit of the opposite. I get so caught up in the nuances of Marty Supreme and all the other stuff.
Very much more artful movie.
Much more artful movie. Where here, it's a little bit of the opposite, and that I have more frustrations with this film, but I'm willing to let those go because from moment to moment, the filmmaking is just so great. Like, I love these characters. I love being with these characters. You know, we talked earlier about how great Sam Worthington is in The Way of Water, and that is his best performance so far. But I still think he's very good as this character. He doesn't have quite as much to chew on here. He has more bite narratively in The Way of Water, but given what he's tasked to do here, especially given those parallels to Quaritch, I do really like. I love those two characters as a yin and yang of sorts, especially given that in this film, Quaritch is essentially going through the arc that Jake did in the first film,
which I love.
A lot of people have pointed out.
Just in an opposing way, a more villainous, violent way.
Yes.
But he's also someone that's losing a sense of his humanity, like Jake did in that first movie. And they kind of form like a weird allegiance in a way, at least in the first third. This is why I've seen a few critics out there make the comparison that this Avatar trilogy now, if you want to call it a trilogy, kind of mirrors the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, which I only half agree with. I don't fully agree with that. At the very least, I would agree that Fire and Ash maybe is kind of similar to Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. But I wouldn't say that Way of Water is similar to Dead Man's Chest in that regard.
That to me is the most insane comparison. I don't understand that at all.
I will say this, like the fact that maybe they were made so close to each other that they feel kind of similar. I get that general idea, but you could say the same thing about the Matrix trilogy. But like the whole idea that, let's say, like how we experience Jake Sully and Colonel Quaritch kind of teaming up for a moment and then not. Like the whole double crossing kind of angle of it, I guess, is somewhat similar to At World's End, at least when you think about Jack Sparrow and Barbossa. There's a little bit of like allegiances that form and then they break, then they form again, then they break. So I guess that's kind of similar, but
are we talking about structure? Is that where the comparison is coming from structurally?
I think it's more coming from the fact that a movie or a trilogy like the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, much like the Matrix trilogy, and I guess to even an extent the Back to the Future trilogy, they were made with a single film in mind that then got formatted into a trilogy by making two sequels back to back. And I guess like structurally in that regard, I guess it is kind of similar as far as how the filmmaking is concerned. But I think beyond the superficial comparisons, I don't know if they're really that comparable.
Okay. Now that makes a little bit more sense to me if we're talking about structure.
Yeah.
And how films come about, because that first Pirates is an all-time banger.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that. And Pirates 3 is incredible. Like, to me, I think the disparity between 1 and 3 is really not that much. 2 is by far the weakest.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they're making a comparison to a trilogy where, okay, so I'm doing this on YouTube. For those who are actually watching on YouTube, I'm gonna do a hand gesture here. The Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy does one of these like downward curves, whereas Avatar does one of these upward curves. It's literally the exact opposite in quality as far as
the curve is more closer to Star Wars than it is Pirates.
Sure.
Like Pirates and Matrix don't make sense to me if that's the comparison being made.
I think the comparison's more so to do with the filmmaking and how the trilogy.
And that makes more sense. If that is the perspective, that makes a little bit more sense. I can understand that. But yeah, and I think some of it is Cameron wanted to tell these stories simultaneously, but didn't really have the time and had to split them up. But I don't think he could find a story to make it work. And that to me is the problem. I joked about it in my opening thoughts as far as him not really having a script. Part of me believes that. I don't know if he did have a script up until it was about time to shoot and then realized, oh, crap, I don't have any plot. What do I do here? And so then he just writes in the exact same formula. I mean, because otherwise, like, the parallels make sense. Having characters that have a role here that would influence the events of The Way of Water, I certainly get that for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of the writing here, I think, does a disservice to the trajectory of where we left off with the previous characters. And here's a couple of examples of what I'm talking about in terms of why I think the writing here just doesn't make a lot of sense. One major frustration I have with this film is the relationship of Jake and Loek. By the time you get to the ending of The Way of Water. And there's been a lot of frustration between those two characters, how Loak does not listen to his father at all, and it creates a bit of a riff. Jake understands that if Loak doesn't abide by his word, it's going to put his family in stake. Lo and behold, what happens at the end of that film? He disobeys his father. His son is killed. Loak's brother is killed. And it creates this emotional trajectory.
Yeah.
But you get the end of that film. You get the end of that film where Jake realizes that there is value to his son that is separate from the one that he just lost.
Yeah.
And that having him alive, given the stakes, matters. And it was his son that saved him from the sinking ship. So when you get out of the ship, they come to the surface. And as I noted earlier, you have that gorgeous moment between the two of them where Jake tells him, I see you now. This film, Fire and Ash, completely ignores all of that. Just acts as if it doesn't exist.
It regurgitates that too. It's like
it's the same arc again.
This is why I think if hypothetically both of these two movies were initially written and conceived as a single script that got split into two, my guess is that at least 80 to 90% of that script ended up being The Way of Water.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
the rest of it must have been extended to become Fire and Ash.
Well, yeah,
because
I mean, because
so much of what happens here feels like it was a natural extension of just the third act of The Way of Water.
Yeah.
By also simultaneously ignoring some of the arcs that crystallized in that initial third act.
Yeah. Because I think about Loak and Payakan, and I love that dynamic in The Way of Water.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Like again, in this film, Payakan is outcast.
Yeah.
He was outcast in the first film. Why are we outcasting him again? Now, granted, it leads to an incredible moment when this film all of a sudden becomes a courtroom drama. And I was very compelled by it turning into A Few Good Men. Like, it was quite incredible.
A few good whales. I love that.
A few good whales. A few good Tolkien. That should have been the subtitle to this movie. And look, I enjoyed that as well. Again, like from moment to moment, I can have a lot of fun with this movie. I think there's a lot of fun to be had despite those redundancies. But they are redundant. And sometimes it leads to something compelling. Again, I love the duality between Jake and Quaritch, the fighting. And there was a really great tweet going around on Twitter about how these films just feel like Jake and Quaritch getting together and fighting each other tooth and nail, and then them going, okay, we'll see each other tomorrow night, same time. And it's just like,
and it's funny because like James Cameron in interviews has said things like how much that Quaritch and Jake Sully actually need each other. Yeah. And I definitely sense that, but you also got that in that last movie, The Way of Water.
And again, you did. You very much
like
did.
that psychological component to their relationship was already kind of there in a way, but was more nuanced in how it was depicted there.
And I agree, but I do love the mirroring effect, especially given that Quaritch is essentially going through the same arc that Jake did in the first film, but instead of it being built on faith and family, his relationship with Varang is built on vengeance and brutality and violence, as we talked about earlier. And it's interesting how fatherhood plays a major role in all of that for the both of them as well, particularly with Spider and Quaritch's case. And again, how that continues that trajectory from The Way of Water, I do find compelling here, despite some of the plotting redundancies and the location redundancies. I still think there's a lot to like there, but equally, I'm frustrated by elements like Jake and Loak, which to me, that adds nothing new. It doesn't continue a trajectory. If anything, it just flatly ignores an incredible arc in The Way of Water to ultimately not just regurgitate the same arc here, but do nothing interesting. And also, by the way, we don't crystallize that in this film.
We don't.
That's saved for later on. So that to me is such a missed opportunity. Or I think about and again, maybe this is spoilers. Maybe we can veer into spoilers now.
Yeah,
I, mean, we've been
I have
talking
thoughts about
this film for
I have thoughts
an
about
hour.
one particular thing at the end that would definitely be a spoiler, and I want to see.
Okay, and that's what I was going to bring up next in terms of my frustrations and more examples of what I'm talking about. So, spoiler alert for Avatar: Fire and Ash for the rest of this conversation. But I felt the same way about Kate Winslet's Ronell character, who I really like in The Way of Water as a supporting character, has a bit of poignancy to her. And she's in this film kind of coming and going throughout. It doesn't feel like she adds all that much, but she has this huge moment at the end where she is the sacrificial lamb. So she is the character that is supposed to bring some sort of emotional stakes, but because the character just kind of comes and goes, there's barely any emphasis to her. We're only supposed to feel something because she's giving birth simultaneously. I felt nothing. It felt like a nothing movie. Or moment, excuse me. And the same thing with one of her sons is killed in the action sequence.
and
you get a brief little moment,
disposed of.
just completely disposed of, and it feels so empty and hollow.
Yeah, it feels
Because this
inconsequential, like it
film-
was just nothing.
Exactly. Because the film isn't emphasizing those things here as much as they're just background players that come and go. But then when the time comes, Cameron treats it as if it's supposed to be this big emotional propulsive moment, and it's just not. I feel like if those two things happened in The Way of Water, it would have been much more effective because we're introduced to those characters. There's more for Kate Winslet to do in the previous film, which I think would have added more emotional weight. And then there's that whole trajectory with her son and her kids and the rivalry between them and Loak and his brother. So if one of them died or sacrificed themselves at the end in that final battle, it would have had at least more. I don't know if it would have had the same weight as the brother dying, obviously, but it would have.
No, but at least
I
it would have
think, had
made sense
more.
and justified it.
Yes.
Yeah,
But to just throw them in here as like, okay, let's just get rid of these characters because we need some consequences here.
Yeah.
And it was fleeting to me. Meant
I-
nothing.
I
Monday.
felt kind of similarly for different reasons though when it comes to the final match / confrontation between Quaritch and Jake Sully. And what I mean by that is I actually like the way it sort of crystallizes.
Mhm.
And then there's a moment later in how it crystallizes for Quaritch that I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know if I buy that. And a lot of it could also be dependent on what's about to come next and maybe how that's explored further. But since we're in spoilers, I'll just simply say there's a moment where their fight, Quaritch and Sully specifically, crystallizes in Sully having to save both Spider and Quaritch. And after he does, they pause and linger on that moment as if to recognize, well, this is awkward, and maybe we do kind of need each other. But then everyone else shows up. Nateri and the family show up, and what does Quaritch do? He basically tries to commit suicide. And I don't. Well, I mean, does he?
We don't-
But here's the thing: if he really is genuinely like, "I'm done, I'm getting out of this," that is so out of character. Like that
No.
is so out of character.
Okay,
for
I
him.
did not read that moment that way. I
kind of did. I kind of
have-
got a sense that he was giving up.
no. The way he smiles there, he zero chance he's killing himself there.
Does
Zero.
he, well, what the hell's his backup plan? Like, what does he
I
have
just-
lined up on?
There's something there. His girlfriend is there. 100%. It's something to that effect. She's probably there on one of those bird-like creatures or whatever, and he or she's gonna save him. Varang is for sure gonna get him out of this. I have zero doubt because again, remember once Varang encounters Natiri there, she disappears for like the final 20 minutes of the movie
Yeah,
with no
she does.
crystallization whatsoever.
hmm
And then, as you noted, Quartz just kind of leaps off the edge there. She's there. 100%. 100%.
It has to be. Otherwise, it's just so out of character for him to do that.
Yes. Yeah, no, Quartz is not going anywhere. There's absolutely zero chance that he dies there. None
I hope
whatsoever.
not.
I
I hope
promise you. I promise you.
How-
He will be in the next movie. 100%.
How hilarious would that be if Avatar 4 comes around and we find out he actually did die?
No, if that was the case, I'll come around. But like in the moment, especially knowing Cameron's writing, there's just no way he would go that far. He would not do that. that character is way too important. And again, because that's exactly why this is a bridge movie. There was no way he was going to crystallize that relationship in that moment, not given everything that preceded it. And everything that we saw with Spider and Varang. There's so much to explore with that relationship, with that dynamic. They're going to become king and queen in the next movie. Maybe they'll have little babies. Who knows? They'll have little fire and ash babies.
Fire babies, I love it.
Little fire babies. And his art, because where I see this going is that he's just going to become the parallel Jake.
Yeah,
more and
he's
more.
going to be the Ash parallel Jake Sully. Yeah, they're going to become
and maybe
equals.
at the end of the next movie, it's one of his sons that's killed in battle, and then he has to go through that emotional trajectory as Jake does here. So, if where this is, like, that's likely where this is headed.
Well, like I could see some of those complexities that are pretty interesting, and we already talked about that with The Way of Water, how the line between Na'vi and human was starting to blur a bit. Like, that was really intriguing, and we do get that here as well, but it also feels like table setting for something else that's about to come. I think The Way of Water did that kind of complexity analysis, if you will, much better. I really do think it did. So I'm curious to see where it goes, at least with regard to Quaritch. But I don't know.
Because another interesting duality here is the RDA working with the Ash people. Now, obviously, Quaritch is working as a middleman, so to speak. And there's that great moment when the Ash people get to the base and the general's like, I don't really want them here. And Varang is working it like she's on the red carpet, as people have talked about. And that's a really fun and interesting, compelling moment. But again, beyond those superficialities, it's that idea of the RDA, this greedy corporation that's just there to mine the world, with one of the clans, one of the indigenous clans that live there working together and wanting to dig into that disparity or that collaboration. Why are they continuing to work together? Is it just because Varang wants the weapons? And if that's the case, what is her end goal? We don't know any of that right now. Like, this film actively refuses to dig.
It's not a
into
complete
any
movie.
of that.
At least The Way of Water was a complete movie. This is not a complete movie.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of questions. That's why I don't think Quaritch is dead, because it feels like Cameron is raising these questions. It's introducing a lot of things. And maybe that idea, like, what is Varang's end goal? Why is she working with this human greedy corporation? Is it just for the weapon? Like, I just want to know. And I think we're going to get more of that, which is why Quaritch is very much still alive and why this is just a bridge movie. And look, I'm not saying that necessarily to disparage it. Where I think this film falters is Cameron having really no plan as far as how to expand what we saw in The Way of Water with these new characters.
Yeah.
He ran out of time, didn't know how to tell this particular story, so he just brought in what he knew to be familiar, what he could easily get away with, because they have the technology, they have the boats. It's the same machinery, the same boats, the same shots. It's a lot of the same from The Way of Water. So it's very easy to film this film because you're not having to invent anything. The only invention here, aside from creature design, is, you got the
Wind People,
like how
the Wind
they did the
Traders.
Wind People. Yeah, the Wind Traders.
Which
And-
I guess is
and
maybe
those-
setting up what the fourth will be, because I feel like each of these four movies will be some earthly element of sorts.
because
You
he's
have
just
water
flatly stealing Avatar
from
the Last
Avatar.
Airbender.
All I'll say is this: with this being such a bridge movie, to your point, Avatar 4, whatever the title ends up being, it's probably going to have wind in the title somewhere. That movie better flat out rock. Like, it better rock to justify this kind of bridge middle ground movie that this is.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think that's where I think 4 and 5 will probably be some sort of epic conclusion. Like, I am fully anticipating that. And I do think that we'll get there. And I think we're gonna like everything that's set up here. We'll explore more in 4, and then 5 will just be, and maybe it'll be a little bit like the final Harry Potter film, where part 1 was heavily character driven, emotional driven, like we're setting up everything, and then part 2 was basically just a battle at Hogwarts.
Yeah, it
It'll
basically
probably
becomes
be something like that.
like a 2-hour action climax, a third act
Yeah.
climax that stretch out into 2 hours essentially. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's probably where this is headed. I very much anticipate 4 will get us back to everything that we set up in the last one. Here's much more of that in depth. Here's why Varang's doing what she's doing. This is why Loak and Jake had the most redundant arc ever. Payakan, whatever happens to him, like he's kind of brought back into the fold a little bit at the end of this film, I guess. So I think Cameron will answer those questions in the next movie. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that as a bad thing. I think this film was very purposefully made as let's introduce things, but we'll make it fun. That's why everything's bigger. That's why I joked earlier, like as far as the producers reading the script and going, but Cameron, this is the exact same movie. And he's like, yeah, but it's bigger, isn't it? The scale, everything is bigger here. Like, I think that's why he does that, because narratively, character-wise, yes, there are some interesting new things. There are a bunch of great parallels, but mostly we're setting up a bunch of things that are crystallized. Because even those interesting things I love here, they're not like wrapped up. Like all the biblical, full Genesis 22 moment, like
It's
that's
pretty
a
high
great
level.
moment.
Yeah.
It's high level, but I don't like, there's still much more to that relationship that isn't really answered by the end of this film. So like, I think we're just going to get more in the next one. That's it.
Here's my question then. Do you think James Cameron will be the one to direct the next movie?
Yeah, I think he's going to direct all 5 of them.
Yeah, somehow I feel like he will. I know he has toyed with the idea of maybe passing the torch over, depending on how this movie does, but I think he'll find a way to make them. I think he's too closely tied to them.
No, it's his babies.
I really hope that if he is going to make 4 and 5, which I assume he is, he finds some way to make it feel and even look kind of new and distinctive when compared to the other two. Because I will say this, as much as Avatar: The Way of Water still felt like an Avatar movie, it still had its own visual identity to it. Fighter and Ash kind of has the same visual identity as The Way of Water, just with a little bit more flames added to it. It's kind of really the only difference. So I hope he's able to find some new visual distinctive characteristic that separates these movies from the other ones that he is now making here. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, and if this film doesn't do as well at the box office, critically speaking, it's a little weaker than The Way of Water. Maybe he'll take that as some sort of personal offense. I don't know. To be like, okay, I'm going to make this next one undeniable. But look, to me, when I look at Fire and Ash, there's nothing about this film that is round or complete. There isn't. And I don't think anyone can convince me otherwise. I would love to hear more from people. If you're one of those that just vehemently disagrees with me, that's fine. And again, I'm talking about making things round and sharp like The Way of Water did. And maybe, again, maybe that's not the point. Maybe this is trying to do something new and different, and that's fine.
If it's trying to be a bridge movie, then that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I feel like the narrative has been that it's not trying to do that.
And that's what I mean. Like if the narrative is that this stands on its own, okay, I would really love to hear that, because I don't see that at all. There's nothing here that feels complete. Everything is open-ended by the end of this film. Almost everything. The only thing that feels kind of like it's complete, given what it's trying to do here, is maybe Payakan, because I think by the end
I was going to say,
film,
I feel like we're probably done with the Tolkien maybe at this point now.
Yeah. At least in terms of how they invoke drama.
Yeah.
Now, if they're just another clan that can help them in the battle, that's fine. I wouldn't mind that being the case. especially now that Payakan is back, like he's back in the clan, like he's been accepted back by the end. Like to do more with that, totally fine. And then the other thing, and honestly, this has been kind of lost in the conversation, is Kiri and that spiritual enlightenment that she has. And this is a very spiritual series of films.
We actually get a lot of Awa in this. We see
Yes.
Awa in this movie.
Yeah, we see Awa and how she's connected to Kiri. I think is really great. Like I do love all of that. Like that feels like a complete arc here, given what this film was trying to do with it. Now there's more to that story, but at least by the end, that doesn't feel like it's been lost or that it's open ended. It feels like, given the space and time in which this story takes place, that element was completed here. And maybe you could argue with Spider, given where he ends up by the end of the film. Again, despite the performance, but just in terms of character. So there are a few things that feel kind of complete, but there's just so much here that is left open ended. That, again, fun. It's really, really fun. I liked it a lot, especially as a spectacle. I cannot emphasize that enough.
We're still in spoilers. Let me ask you one final question before we get to final thoughts. What did you think of Spider and Kiri's kiss that they had?
I don't know if I should take that too seriously. I don't know.
That's a good way to respond, because I found it painfully awkward.
Yeah.
But I don't know
too.
if it was supposed to be.
Yeah. I don't
Like,
yeah, because
it's
because Kiri just is one of those characters that she loves her family, she loves Awa, and is like so much of her character, especially in this film, is dedicated to this spiritual crisis. That her having genuine, true feelings for Spider, that feels very shoehorned, if that's what Cameron is trying to do. Which is why I don't know if, like, I don't want to criticize the moment for that, because I don't think that's what Cameron is doing.
I don't know if that's what it's going for. I'm not sure yet.
It just could be one of those, like, I'm grateful that you're alive. I love that you went on this journey with me.
Yeah.
Here's a moment.
I couldn't tell if it was meant to be romantic or not. I saw the movie with a buddy of mine, and his reaction to that when we got out of the theater was pretty hilarious. He said something like, a young 20-year-old boy being told to make out with Sigourney Weaver. What kind of intimacy coordinators were on set for that one?
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
But it's like, I get, like, if the moment is so awkward that it gets you thinking about that particular thing and how it was made and how it was shot, then I don't know if the moment is working.
Yeah.
So, like, I kind of have to give him some credibility for that very funny observation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was awkward is basically what I'm trying to say.
No, it is awkward, and I don't think it works romantically. But I don't think that's what it's going for necessarily. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, because if if they become a thing, then it's like, oh, okay. Oh.
I'm not sold on that. I'm not sold on that at all.
But I'm willing to give this film the benefit of the doubt, because this could be one of those things like what I was hoping for with Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning.
Oh, yeah.
I liked the film. I had reservations and was really hoping that Final Reckoning would answer those questions for me. Ultimately, it didn't. But I'm kind of in that same case here, or in that same vein here, where I like this film. I have a lot of questions. A lot of it's open-ended. What the next film or what the next two films do could very much, in retrospect, make me love this film even more. And maybe my reservations are just waiting to be answered.
This is a to be continued kind of
to be continued. Exactly.
Yeah. So we basically went on for about an hour and a half here just to say to be continued as far as how we feel about
to be continued. Yeah, we're obviously recording this in December 2025.
Yeah, so it reflects how we feel right now.
Let's say 5 comes out in 2031.
Yeah.
In December 2031, when Avatar 5 comes out, brought to you by Disney Apple, then and it answers all my questions. I'll be able to look back at that conversation we had in December of 2025 and go, you know what? All those reservations I had were nonsense. James Cameron knew what he was doing. He answered everything, and now I love that film as much as everybody else.
Yeah,
that
I'm
could
kinda
happen.
with you. I'm kind of with
That
you.
could happen. So we'll see. But right now, I'm kind of in a wait and see mode.
Yeah. So when I say it's probably my least favorite Avatar film, it's more of a placeholder at this point to see where things go.
Yeah, and that probably means that it'll always be, like it won't ever be my favorite.
No, but you'll appreciate its placement in the trajectory of the
exactly.
franchise. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it establishes a lot here that if Cameron does it right, that will eventually lead to a lot of really great things in the next few. But you need that time and space.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that in hindsight if that's what he's doing. But we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. As it stands currently, it is Way of Water is far and away the best of the three.
I agree. I'm with you, man. So with you.
Okay, well, look, knowing how the discourse on this is going, a lot of you might disagree with us, and that's fine. So leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right, we have a lot going on this week. I mentioned earlier that we're going to have a review of Marty Supreme coming soon. Be on the lookout for that. Episode 667. This week, we are going to be talking about movie catch-up. We're going to discuss some movies we've recently seen that we haven't had a chance to give full reviews on, so we'll talk about that. New Chasing the Gold, new Women in Session as well, and hopefully a third review of Rental Family. It's out there. I just got to find time to edit. And for the VIP listeners out there, some bonus content. So Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, however you decide to celebrate. Lots of content this week. It is Christmas, but we are not slowing down.
We're gifting.
We're gifting. Lots of gifting to be had. So, but we do hope everyone enjoys the holiday, however you celebrate. Enjoy the week. With that, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Still go Cameron.
Jim, go Cameron.